to excite the rhythm section at times, but I certainly stopped doing that after I started to get banged up a little bit.
My question is, I wanted to know about your thoughts on modern, the modern Cuban sound, timba, and Chucho Valdez, and Bambán, and if that influenced you at all. Do you like it? Do you not like it?
Well, it's not like or not like, but Cuba always is in my opinion, in the forefront of what they do. What happened was that after 1960, the structures that I was really listening to were the structures before 1960, with the orchestras that were coming out of Cuba then. After 1960, the revolution, they certainly got more and more jazz influence, and there when you have great talents like Chucho Valdez, Gonzalito Rubalcaba, an excellent pianist, and the different bands that were coming out of Cuba, including Los Bambán and Hela Banda. These orchestras also utilized more jazz phrasings that were being used before. They started to go into the world of jazz within their Latin jazz comprehension because of the rhythmical pattern that they understand so well. So it wasn't a question of me liking it or not liking it, Latin, but also the same thing. But Cuba's always been an exciting island, a country, but the island has always been, in my opinion, in the forefront, rhythmically and harmonically, and the vocalists that come out of there are just quite unique, all of them.
So you were mentioning earlier your Montuno stuff, and I was really liked your Montuno beats. I think that's one of the things you're known for. But when you
What was that again?
Your Montuno stuff.
Oh, okay, my Montuno stuff.
Yeah, I know that you usually use the Montuno as a part of the rhythm section, but when you have a bigger and bigger orchestra and you add more horns and more background voices to the arrangements, how do you kind of compensate so the horns aren't being kind of redundant? So you can stay on Montuno. Generally, how do you voice the?
Well, if it's a large orchestra, then I have to hit it a little harder. But it's usually the wajayos are usually very complimentary, whether it's a small orchestra or large, in my opinion. What makes it comfortable for me to be able to accompany them. And if we have saxophones, for example, they're doing another kind of a riff, Remember that the piano has to keep, continuity going to that rhythm and that bass. Between the bass and I is the ones that are to it, that adjust to those montunos. Whichever one they may be. They could be, again, a dominant, and 1, 2, 5, 4 movement, but all those wajayos are very complementary to our structure of our dance music. So I utilize them, whether it's a small group, or large band. I'm still using the rhythmical patterns, on my end that are meant to excite that rhythm section, or that vocalist when he's singing will change within the structure of the album, of the composition. So if we have the vocalist doing his soleos, you have another form of a wajayo behind him, and then all of a sudden, here comes the drummer after a piano solo, for example, and then we change accordingly to him to make that exciting. And usually when that happens, if it's a big band, the saxes would drop out because they certainly can't keep playing. Maybe they'll do a certain amount of bars, but then they stop and it leaves it to the piano and bass again.
I think he was also asking in terms of how to assign, he's a saxophonist and an arranger, how to assign a figure that you may come up with on the piano to the instruments and then back to the piano so that they all overlap and everything.
Well, it all depends. If you have a rhythmical pattern on the piano, for example, you're going boom beep boom beep boom beep boom beep 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 boom boom beep. The saxes can certainly play that, A nice 5 saxes playing boom 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 beep 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 beep. Once they get that going, that's a incredible, exciting, montuno that they play. And then the piano is behind them in another form. If I'm hearing that, I'll change, and now we have two things going at the same time. And because I know that eventually they will drop out, if it's going into a certain part that there's going to be a company of soloists, for example, again. But there's a wonderful world between the exchange of saxophone, riffs, and the piano and bass that can make that work very, very well. And very exciting, for example, for dance music.
So I think we have time for one last one. Yes, sir.
El Sonido Nuevo? El Sonido Nuevo was done with Cal Tjader. Right, Cal Tjader came into New York in 1966, and he came to a club called the Cheetah. And he came over to me and he said that he would like to record. Remember that when Cal Tjader came in earlier in the 50s, late 50s, he took Mongo Santa Maria and a gentleman called Willie Bobo from the Tito Puente Orchestra and took him to California, and that became quite historic, an historical event within the Latin jazz genre. And then he came back in '66 and he wanted to record, not with me alone, but with the Orchestra La Perfecta. And what we did was, I was with another company, still with the Tico, so we did an exchange of artists. We did the first one for Bird Records, MGM, and with Rudy Van Gettler, by the way, okay? Who was quite eccentric, recording with his gloves and white gloves. And
Still
you couldn't smoke in the studio, none of that.
Still
And couldn't drink, and yeah, he still is.
Right.
And then we recorded another album called Bamboleate with Cal Tjader, and those were the two that we did for him.
So when did Champagne come in after that?
And then after Champagne came in about 1968. And then by 1969, we did one called Superimposition. And that's when the change of orchestra from La Perfecta, it was already starting in 68. Because in 68, Cachao plays bass, Cheo Feliciano sings, and then he moves to Puerto Rico. And by 1969 is when a young drummer comes in, Nicky Marrero, Eladio Perez, and Andy Gonzalez, and the Gonzalez brothers, and Chocolate Aventero on trumpet, with Jose Rodriguez on trombone, because Barry Rogers had left, to go in. As a matter of fact, eventually he goes into Dreams with the Brecker Brothers. You do that a little later. But that's a change. So that after that CD Champagne, we do Superimposition in 1969.
I do have all the albums, by the way. I do have all the albums.
Oh, really?
And I was at Symphony Sit 10th anniversary of the Village Gate in '69, and also your free concerts in Central Park. Excellent.
Oh, thank you very much.
Well, we have, I'm sure we could have 100 other questions, but we're going to let the maestro take a little break so he can come back and play. I did have one last question. Since you've been mentioning Barry, in Son of Latin Music, it was this great talk about how you and he collaborated, kind of Ellington Strayhorn type of collaboration. Can you talk about that?
Oh, well, Barry was my best bandstand buddy that I could have had, when I first started my orchestra. And Barry was genius in his own right. I mean, not only was a great musician, great trombonist in his approach, but he was his father had a sailboat. He was a great photographer. He was a great driver. He was a great mechanic, auto mechanic. I mean, he did everything that he did, photography, everything you could think of, and had a wonderful collection of all world music. So when we met, he had been traveling with rhythm and blues bands, and he had been playing Latin music, but not in the let's call it not in the major orchestras that were happening then, because they weren't using trombones. So he was mostly working with Latin orchestras that were around Boston Post Road, the Half Moon, and this down in Harlem and that, and okay. So when we meet in a social club that Johnny Pacheco was doing these jam sessions, and sure enough, I speak back, I hear him play, and I wanted to have what they had called a conjunto, trumpets, but it was hard to get the trumpet players at that time starting. They wouldn't stay with the band. It was really difficult the time to put trumpets together,
The guys that could hit double E were in big demand.
Yeah, right, and they were really working with other bands. So I started the perfecta with one trombone, only him, and the flute player, George Castro. Eventually, we set a band. And you wanted to keep it, low so you could be able to get employment. It was hard to put a big band together, not more than 9 or 10 men. So that's how it started. And then we added another trombone for it. Julian Priester recorded me also. A gentleman called Mark Weiss, who became a professor. But the gentleman that really made it happen all was a gentleman called Jose Rodriguez, who came from Brazil via Santo Domingo, and Barry found him in a recording studio. And he said, Eddie, I found the second, this is the guy. So that's how we started. Then we had 8, and now the 2 trombones gave the power, So my collaboration was with Barry constantly when I was structuring my compositions. And then he would write, because the trombone, I didn't know much about the trombone then, I was more interested in trumpet writing in the conjunto sound. But the trombone, was a fascinating instrument, and then watching him play, I said, okay, here we go. So Barry then would handle the 2 horns, okay? And since he also sang choral with the singers, so then we would change the high notes so when we came back from a certain, a movement, that it would go to Jose. And then we had a great combination there, all right, in the presentation of the 2 horns. When we separate in 1968, that he goes, his way, and I then changed the orchestra. We don't see each other till 1974. And that's when I signed with this other record company, a new record company. I'm married to get away from Tico, which was quite difficult. And they bring Barry in to record with me again and collaborate. And that's how it started. So we work on an album in 74, which is called Sentido, which has Puerto Rico, Adoración, that we played before. And that's how it starts then. And then the same company then said, well, it worked so well, would you like to work with Barry One West? Of course, no problem. And then we went into the Southern Latin music, which then wins the first Grammy, since we were in category for 17 years in the genre. And the one who handed it to me is the Chick Corea at the Towers, buildings in New York. That's where they were held. They were coming out of California, but they had these different chapters that were being used in New York, and they had Memphis, I believe, how it started. So in 75, they had 1 Grammy for all of Latin music and all of the Latin artists in the world, which is quite absurd, right? But now we have different categories, and now with the Laris, now the Latin Grammys also has an opportunity to. What happened was, it was very difficult to be able to record in the jazz, in Latin jazz, and then be put into the jazz category. It was very difficult to win a Grammy. You could get the nomination, but to win it, if you play piano, for example, you gotta go Keith Jarrett or Herbie Hancock, or Korea, Kenny Barron, these are the pianists that belong in the jazz category. And now you find that in the Latin jazz category, you have the jazz musicians coming in there because they're intrigued with the Latin rhythmical patterns, okay? So it became quite a wonderful thing that's happened within the Grammy structures. But the work that we did with Barry in 75, in a composition called Diabolito, it was a composition that I had written on a boat ride. I don't know if you remember these boat rides I used to leave from 125th Street to go to Bear Mountain. Dayline, and everyone hated those boat rides because it started so early in the morning on Sundays, and we worked so late on Saturday night till 4 in the morning, and then you had to be on the boat, at 9 o'clock with another orchestra, and then you took off for Bear Mountain, you spent the whole day there, they came back in there, I sat behind some conga drums, And I started to sing, you know, en un día tan bonito como hoy, that was a beautiful day, you know, that we're going into that. And that's how that arrangement started. Then I started to work on it, and then eventually, when I finished the structure done, you know, I did what I wanted, and that then married with the orchestration, and it became, you know, quite an incredible recording. Okay.
Well, Mr. Palmieri, it's such a pleasure.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Such a pleasure.
And thank you all for being here. Thank you.
I hope everybody has a ticket, because we got to put you all out now, and we hope that you will be back soon. But we're going to have a sound check. Thank you for coming.
Thank you very much.
See you shortly.
Thank
Eddie
you.
Palmieri.
Thank you.